Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Time for the latest episode of Let's Talk About. And this week we're going to focus on Newcastle United's front three. What has to happen this summer? Who has to go? Who has to come in? And much more to discuss. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined as usual by John Gibson. John, welcome back to the podcast. How are you keeping? Are you well?
I'm keeping well. I like the summer. We never lose a game in the summer, so I always enjoy it.
At the time of recording, Newcastle United are yet to make a big marquee signing. They brought in a couple of players on a free transfer and what have you. But at the time of recording, 23rd of July, not a big name's come in yet. Are you a little bit worried given that the season is less than a month away?
I am a tad because I'm a great believer in the earlier you get signings in, the better, because you want to give them the maximum time to bed in before the Premier League season gets underway. That's both in training, tactically in the pre-season games, getting to know your teammates, etc., etc. So, in the most ideal world, there is what you want are signings in by the time players return for pre-season training. Though goodness knows these days that's so scattergun, because I mean, people, we were in pre-season training, and Trippier and Gordon hadn't come back from the Euros, which was last season, if you like, continuing. So, in ideal world, there isn't such a thing, but I like, and I believe that Eddie would feel the same way for some reason, whether it's financial, the end of the accountancy window, June the 30th, uh, etc., etc. But signings become late. I'm always anxious when they arrive just before the end of the window because the season is actually underway there, and they've missed all the pre-season. I mean, if you remember the interviews over the weekend with Lewis Hall, one of the reasons he put forward for last season being such a slow burner for him was that he hadn't had a good pre-season at Chelsea because they knew he was going and they weren't too bothered about him. And, you know, that can happen with any signings now. Kelly's been a good signing because on day one we reported from training he was there. But the sooner we get people, in an ideal world, we want two signings in before we go to Japan. But of course, it's not an ideal world. And so, yes, I am concerned. We've got, apart from goalkeepers, and to be truthful, we're talking about the number two goalkeeper and the number three goalkeeper, which is hardly going to impact hugely on the team itself. We've got Kelly, a free transfer boy, to play either centre half or left back. And that's it. So I am anxious that we get the business done because, like everything, Andrew, words are cheap, actions are what count.
I agree with that sentiment. And I think as well, given what's happened over the last few days and everyone's got their different opinion on that Eddie Howe interview and his happiness and, he's frustrated a little bit. He wants roles defined and there's been clearly talks been held and hopefully that's it all sorted now. But there is a bit of a negativity, I think, swirling around the club and the fan base. And a signing in the next few days before they head out to Japan would just boost everyone, I think. And it is much needed just to shift the news agenda away from a potential unhappy Eddie Howe, who might have his head turned when England come knocking, despite what he said to the media about not being interested. I do think a signing would just pick everybody up and let them go off and enjoy Japan in slightly better spirits.
And not to mention the thousands of Geordie supporters back home feeling a sigh of relief. Yes, because there's been a significant change, and Eddie took the opportunity, and it's natural to do so, that I there's been a change. I've lost my great ally, which is Amanda. I've had a new guy come in who is going to be director of sport, and he looks to have more power and be more hands-on than Dan was. So I'm a little bit under pressure. I've got a strong hand at the moment because England want me. I don't want to go in an ideal world. I want to stay at Newcastle, but I want to make. I don't think he wants any more than he already has. He wants not to sacrifice anything that he started with, even if that's a little bit of control over signings because the signings won't be made that he doesn't want, or people standing on the touchline during training, or they intimidating or they're not. I think he needs reassurances on that. It's understandable with hindsight. I mean, it was sensational. The interview was sensational because here was a man that says nothing and says it beautifully and says it with 50,000 words. All of a sudden, every word had a meaning. And, and he recorded for several outlets. So fans sometimes say, oh, it's the press making big things out of a story. That could not be said here because they're in front of you with the videos of Eddie talking in Germany, and he was saying the emotive words that I'm only happy if I'm kept happy, and this is what it takes. Now, I did an article in the paper, everybody did one, but saying Darren Eales is the man that can be the peacemaker. Peace is too strong a word, peacemaker, because war hadn't broken out. It was just a worry. But it's a worry that has to be nipped in the bud. And Eales is the man that knows Mitchell and knows Eddie and can be the go-between to smooth the ways. And that's what he's attempted to do. Now, I think that's reassuring, and everybody's saying that Eddie felt good at the end of that. That's fine so far. But what Eddie will be saying is that what I've just said, Andrew, that words are cheap, let's have actions. And the actions in this transfer window, not only do we sign, at the very least, an outside right and a centre half, maybe a centre forward as well, but they are the men that Eddie wants, as opposed to the men that Mitchell wants, who mightn't fit into Eddie's pattern. So, we wish to see those signings happen, and we wish Eddie to be very confident that they are the right people for the team, the way he's going to structure the team.
Do you think the first signing is going to be the most interesting one? Because it's the first signing of the new structure with Paul Mitchell working with Eddie Howe. And I think people are going to be really intrigued to see the type of player it is and obviously who it is, but more just the first signing of that new partnership. And I do think it's going to be the most important one, potentially. It's going to maybe set the bar for what's to come.
Yeah, and especially if that signing is the outside right, which is what I hope it will be. If it's a right-sided centre half, that's good, that's important, but it's somebody to challenge Shaw. It's somebody to say, I'm not cover for you. I'm going to challenge you to try to get in the team. But we all accept that the outside right is going to go straight into the team. Oh, it's quickly, he's match fit and up to speed, etc., etc. He is going to be an automatic first teamer. Will the centre half be? Shaw might have something to say about that, but the outside right is going to be. So I would like them to make a statement signing of an outside right, ideally before they go to Japan. And I think Eddie feels exactly the same way. Wants to get somebody through the door that Paul Mitchell is enthusiastic about, and Eddie as well is enthusiastic about. And it's a sort of name that the third people in this equation, the fans, lap up. Then all of a sudden, everybody's comfortable again, aren't they? If it doesn't happen, and the longer it doesn't happen, we go without a signing, the more people are going to be a bit worried, the more Eddie's going to be saying, well, is this going to go the right way? The more speculation is going to happen, the more encouragement the FA are going to get. And quite frankly, we've gone through a period which, since the takeover, Andrew, we haven't been used to, which is a feeling of a little bit of unsteadiness. Selling players perhaps Eddie would have preferred to keep to get the June the 30th deadline looked after. Losing Amanda and her husband, having the worry about Gordon and the fact that it come out the Liverpool thing, and would it have any effect on Gordon himself? Having it change the sporting director, have Eddie come out, and I mean Eddie could have doused everything down. He threw petrol on the bonfire and knew what he was doing and wasn't being over dramatic, but was looking to get reassurances which he feels he needs, and he'll only get them now through talking from strength. But by Newcastle standards, since Ashley went, this is the period of a little uncertainty that we haven't had before. And the sooner that's put to bed and we can start the season 100% optimistic with all our blue chip players here, with a couple of new signings here, and Eddie happy as Larry, then, we can go places.
Yeah, 100%. I think if the players jet off to Japan and a new signing hasn't arrived, I then do think people will start to feel a lot more nervous and wary about what's going on, because we're also seeing other sides who Newcastle will be battling with next season for European places strengthening. I mean, Nana's just joined Aston Villa. They've already signed Ross Barkley as well. I mean, that's just one example of a team making waves in the transfer market very early on. Do you think that the arrival of Paul Mitchell has delayed things slightly, and is that a good enough excuse for why we haven't really seen too much action in the transfer market from Newcastle's point of view?
No, I don't. I think it's a ready-made excuse that could be used, but I don't think it holds a lot of water. I mean, we signed Kelly before Mitchell come. We were getting on with our business before he come. Um, I think he's a very forceful character, very strong character, which is a great thing. Eddie is in a totally different way. He mightn't look forceful up front, but I think he's stubborn and deliberate and a workaholic and doesn't want to be messed around and wants to retain as much authority as it's possible to retain in a modern day manager who will never have the one-eyed situation that was faced by, say, Kevin Keegan and Joe Harvey, who are the greatest, in my humble opinion, the greatest readers of talent in bringing the right people. They had a wonderful record, but they operated alone. They didn't operate with a director of football or anyone else interfering. That's not the word, but having a say in this situation. They didn't have all that. But Eddie wants to keep as much of the old-fashioned type of control as he can. I mean, if I want to be positive, and by Jove, I want to be positive because this is my club, it's your club, and it's every Geordie's club. We don't want to be negative. We don't want to think life's going to get tough. We've just got out of the wind tunnel with Mike Ashley. We don't want to go back into it. So if I'm going to be positive, I'm hoping that Mitchell will bring some fresh ideas with him. And because he has got great scope and great experience with Southampton, with Spurs, with Monaco, and that he's got a lot of good contacts on the continent, that he'll perhaps find or alert Newcastle and the team with Nixon, etc., to players that perhaps weren't on their radar. But then Newcastle will see those players for what they are, i.e., good players, and it'll be in harmony. We'll go and get them. So I'm hoping that perhaps he opens a window on the transfer market and lets a breath of fresh air in, because you want to be positive about the thing. You don't. The last thing in the world you want is a and I'm not suggesting we've got this for 1 second, but the last thing you want in the world is a sporting director and a manager singing off two different hymn sheets, because then the sporting director signs a guy, the manager doesn't want him, and then doesn't play him. So, you've wasted your money. The nearest we got to an example of that is when Kevin Keegan was temporarily put back in residence by Ashley, and Dennis Wise just went and signed players all over the place and told Kevin Keegan to, if you wanted to see them, to have a look at them on YouTube. I mean, that was never going to work, was it? And I'm not suggesting for 1 second this thing is going to be anything like that between Mitchell and Eddie, but we don't want the worst case scenario. We want the best case scenario where they fit together like Morecambe and Wise or fish and chip dinner or whatever, and it all works to our advantage.
Fingers crossed it does, and I'm sure it'll be nothing like that situation of Keegan and Wise. There is going to have to be
That
a bit
was
of
the ultimate
compromise.
awful one, but
Yeah,
you do get much minor ones than that, where there's just a little bit of friction and a little bit of, and you don't want anything like that, because you want Eddie to get enthusiastic, and you also want the player to go pretty well as quickly as possible into the first team. You don't want the path to be the path of Lewis Hall last season, who had to spend three quarters of the season getting up to pace before he really made an effect on the team. We're looking this time. We're not looking for a Lewis Hall situation. We're looking for an outside ride that is not only good enough, but is fit enough and match fit enough for the way we play to go straight in the team and have an immediate impact. We don't want to wait 3/4 of a season like we had to do with Lewis Hall for whatever reason that was, but we need impact quickly.
No, certainly so. And I think there will have to be able to compromise, but you welcome a fresh voice in that kind of situation because it's always good to get different opinions. And I'm sure they're going to
Absolutely.
work really well together. I think what's really interesting, John, is that over the last couple of weeks, especially over the last few days more than anything, is that there's no whispers, there's no rumors, there's no gossip, there's no concrete links, and that intrigues me somewhat. Because you often do in this job, you hear little bits and you get told certain things, but even that has seemingly died down of late.
Yeah.
And I think on one hand, our listeners and viewers will be saying, "Well, that's good." Newcastle United of now seem to have that little bit of a track record where signing just comes out of nowhere. Click of the
Yeah.
fingers and it's done, which is a good thing in many ways. Not of you journalists because you want the story, but from a fan's point of view, it's sometimes good that you don't really know too much about it, and also from a Newcastle United point of view in the boardroom, it stops other clubs maybe jumping you,
Of course.
and taking that player off your hands. But what have
Jumping.
you
Yeah.
made of the kind of quiet airwaves of the last few days?
I think to a great extent, there's so much going on in everybody within the club wishing for Paul Mitchell and Eddie Howe to read off the same song sheet. And, perhaps we're doing them both a disservice because you can have two nice guys and they suddenly wake up and find they go together like Morecambe and Wise. And then everything is wonderful. There's not automatically a suspicion of there being um, friction. I think one of the things about speculation that cannot work too well is the fact, and it happens, everybody put two and two together and got four, but maybe they got five. And if Eddie goes, it'll be Pochettino, it'll be manager because Mitchell worked with him at Southampton and at Spurs, and they got on ever so well. Now, I don't think that did Paul any favours, never mind Eddie any favours, because that made it look as if Paul had his mate waiting in the background and was just waiting to shuffle him into the job. I don't think for 1 second that's true. I think it's a very shrewd and clever surmise that two and two makes four, that this guy's out of a job. And if Eddie suddenly decided to go to England for some reason, he would be available and the two do get on together. But I don't think that does Paul Mitchell any good because I think the quietness is because these two guys are trying to work together behind the scenes, get to know each other, chew the fat, sit, throw up names of possible signings, find out who we want and what sort of player, and do we want the outside right to be left-footed and cut in onto his left foot, and because Newcastle play that way, get into all the details, get a pecking order list, etc., etc. In other words, and Bunt's been part of that, although his situation is slightly different. I don't think he's selecting the guys; he's getting them, making certain they stay fit. And by the way, Eddie's going to welcome him with open arms because they need somebody like that big time. And that's not standing on Eddie's toes. That's something totally separate. Looking after the physical fitness of players in a physio room, etc. But yes, I think the quietness is because they're getting together and they're trying to work out some sort of good partnership. It's like you bring in two strikers, or you bring in a striker and a winger who's going to cross the ball. You get them out on the training field to get to know each other. They're two individuals when they sign for the club, but they've got to form partnerships. Now, Supermac with Hibby or Shearer with Ferdinand or Isaac with his wingers last season. It takes time to get to you're two individuals, but you've got to become one unit, and they do become one unit. But there's a need in the same way. I mean, I believe that as much as the partnership between, say, Bruno and Joe Linton is absolutely crucial in the middle of the park on the grass for us next season, the partnership between Mitchell and Howe is as crucial to us because we need that partnership to be working absolutely, one knowing what the other thinks and what the other's doing, the same as the two lads on the pitch. The two lads on the pitch are what the fans see. The two off the pitch have got to be together as well. Otherwise, we've got a little bit of a problem. Now, I would like to think all this will turn out to be hot air in the end, and they say, well, we worried unnecessarily, and look at the two lads, and look at what they brought into the club. Look at the centre half we've got, and the outside right we've got, and look at we've kept all the blue chip players, and we worried unnecessarily. That is what I pray is going to happen, and I think probably will. But while there's any chance of any disharmony, Geordie fans are bound to feel a little bit apprehensive. We've had too much of people pulling in the wrong direction. If you look back at the reign of Ashley, with all the managers he had, the managers were either subservient and did what they were told by Ashley, or they were like Rafa and bit back, but there was an uncomfortable atmosphere, and Rafa was never going to get a total freedom of what he wanted. So, those days are gone, and we don't want them back. And we've had such a harmonious journey through a couple of seasons to where we are now. We want that to continue.
Yeah. And it's understood that the two have met now, and the way it will work
Correct.
is that Howe and his backroom team will get a short list of players to select from rather than being told exactly who the club will be signing, which seems exactly the way it should work. Eddie Howe, at the end of the day, is the one picking the players. He's the one training the players. I think that's a good compromise, and that's how those two will work and should work going forward. Let's be honest, John. Right now, right here, the options Eddie Howe has got across the front three are simply not enough for Newcastle United to get back in the top four. That's a fair assessment, isn't it?
I think it is very, very fair assessment. I mean, if I look at the front three as things stand today, before signings are made, you would say Isaac is absolutely the key to everything. 25 goals centre forward last season. Quite a staggering return. We've never had that for Yonks. We've never had it since Alan Shearer, that sort of return. He was sensational. And not only was he sensational, but he wasn't just a poacher. He could score close-in goals, but he was so elegant, so wonderful to watch. Outside left to him, Gordon, Player of the Year. That tells you everything. From nowhere to Player of the Year. Nowhere when his first half season. He is absolutely critically important. He must be kept. He must be here at the beginning of September when the window's closed. I believe he will be, despite all the huff and puff over Liverpool, which we could have done without. And he could have done without that period of having Liverpool and Southgate not pick him. He must have all of a sudden, after living in Wonderland for 12 months, have thought, oh dear me, this is a bumpy road all of a sudden. But we need Isaac to be the centre forward. We need Gordon to be the outside left. In my opinion, we need a new outside right. But then you're looking at a situation. You've got Murphy to cover outside right from the bench, presuming you've sold Miggy Almiron, and you've got Harvey Barnes that covers outside left. Although that still staggers me a little bit in passing, Andrew, that we signed Harvey Barnes when we already had Anthony Gordon, because they're both two excellent left wingers, but do you play them both? And to do that, you've got to play Gordon on the right, which loses a bit of what he gives you on the left. But and you've got Joe Linton that can cover the left, though I think he's essential to midfield, even with Tonali coming back. But I would sell Miggy, and you need an outside right. But as you say, if we want the top four, you're not just saying, oh, we've got an outside right, we've got Isaac, and we've got Gordon. What a forward line that is. We'll make the top four. There's a thing called injuries, isn't it? And by Jove, we know all about that. And are we going to be good enough if we get a long injury? I mean, we've already got Bachman out. We've already got Lascelles out. We've already got Miley out. And now we've got Wilson decided his once a month injuries upon us again. So you've got to have depth. And that depth means we've got to sign an outside right. And to do that, you've got to sell people, so you may as well sell Miggy because you got Murphy as some sort of cover for that position, as well as moving Gordon across and having Barnes for the odd game, not for any length of time.
Miggy's a really interesting one because I think many people accept he's the one most likely to go because he's probably the one that's going to fetch you the biggest amount of money and the one that you wouldn't, be too sad about leaving. He's been here, great servant, had that one brilliant season. The rest of it, hasn't really hit his true potential. But he is Newcastle's more sellable asset. But again, the links to an exit, the rumours, the gossip, the concrete links, they've died off of late. Let me just present you a scenario, John, where Miguel Almiron starts on that right wing against Southampton. If you can keep your answer clean, I would prefer that, John. What would your reaction be?
My reaction would be we're probably not going to make the top four. Not, and I don't put that on Miggy. I hasten to add that would be so unfair on a lovely guy that's give his all for Newcastle and has still an input to make. But we're living in a cruel world. Football's a cruel world. If we're living in a cruel world, Miggy is not a Champions League regular outside right, and it is being made obvious without words being put into Eddie's mouth because he's far too diplomatic normally to talk about individuals in public. But we all know, because we've had the card mark, that he wants an outside right. So he wants an upgrade on Miggy. So if we start with Miggy outside right, it's because we haven't signed one. And then what's Eddie going to feel? What's the public going to feel about the Eddie and Paul relationship? What they're going to feel about us in the transfer market, having had a bad January and a average one last summer. We have got to make a statement of intent, and the biggest statement of intent. Yes, a centre half would be lovely. Yes, a midfielder would be lovely because Anderson's gone, and perhaps we need one of some sort. Yes, a centre forward would be lovely in case because of the Callum Wilson situation. But the big statement of intent for me would be a top outside right.
No, I think everyone agrees with you. I think that has to be the priority, and we'll get into a couple of names that could be in a second. But I did ask people to send in some questions or thoughts on Newcastle's front three, and we've had plenty of people get in touch on Twitter, which is lovely. And if you want to get over on email, you can do at the EIBW podcast at reachplc.com. And one scenario that's been presented by a couple of people, John, is that Eddie Howe could switch Anthony Gordon onto the right and play Harvey Barnes on the left. Harvey Barnes, obviously hampered by injury last season, but still managed 5 goals and 5 assists in 23 appearances. Let me just read you Alex's point that he makes here on Twitter. He says, with Barnes finishing the season well and proving to be a real match winner, is it worth trying out Gordon on the right and Barnes on the left unless we get a better right wing option? We did it a couple of games last season and Gordon looked more than comfortable. And Tommy asks, how do you keep both Barnes and Gordon happy without Europe? Barnes has started scoring a fair bit at the end of last season and looked sharp in pre-season. So that is a bit of a headache for Eddie Howe. Could you see the solution being Barnes on the left and Gordon on the right? And would you take that over spending 60, 70 million on a right winger?
No, I wouldn't take it over that. But what I would do, and I've advocated and you will recall, Andrew, on the podcast we've done, when I've been picking a team from the current squad we have at the back end of last season, etc., I was saying let's play Gordon outside right and Barnes outside left, because we then got in a debate which you brought up, which I understood. Are we losing something of Gordon on his other side? But when I was faced with what we've got, and by the way, if we were going to start with Miggy on the first day, and then I said we wouldn't be a top 4 side, if we had only what we've got now, I would start with Gordon outside right and Barnes outside left. But I would still say, if that was the case against Southampton, although the windows would still technically be open, we are flirting with not being a top four side this coming season, and perhaps not a top six side, or just making six, which is the lower reaches of Europe. And I think that is a possibility. But even if you sign an outside right, and even if you've got Murphy, there will be times, either through injury or through a dip in form, where you've got to have several strings to your board, and one of the strings to the bow would be moving Gordon across. Now, I'm not. If that was going to be permanent, I'm not certain Anthony Gordon would be thrilled to bits, because he's made the England team as an outside left from being the player of the tournament in the under-21s winning the Euros, and our player of the year, all from outside left, and got in the full England team and got picked for the Euros, albeit just in the squad, from an outside left. I don't think he suddenly wants to be an outside right and think, will I then get in the team against Saka in the England team, etc., etc. But I did say to you at the start of this podcast, Andrew, it was peculiar how we signed Bonds, wasn't it? Anthony Gordon having just come in Bonds is a good. If Bonds has an edge over Gordon anyway, it's probably in his goal scoring. And Gordon did well last season and got into double figures, but he wasn't a great goal scorer before that. Bonds was always a wide player who liked to come in and finish. And they've got a problem with Bonds, I would think that, but that's wonderful. That's what top four teams have got. How many forwards, if we were talking about the front three, which we are, and we're talking about Liverpool, their reserve three, Caputo, or however you pronounce him, who was the star during the Euros, was scoring all the goals from playing outside left, wasn't a regular in the Liverpool team. They can put two lots of front players out and almost look as strong with their second 11, if you like. And that's the way top four clubs have to be. If you've got a great starting 11 but nothing underneath, you're not going to make the Champions League. You make the Champions League when you've got a bank of six for the front, not a bank of three. And you make the Champions League by having a very good, I know we'll come to it, Andrew, but by having a very good and reliable backup to Isaac at centre forward. You don't make Europe by flying by the seat of your pants saying you will make the Champions League, but we'll have Isaac, we'll have Wilson and hope he's fit for half the season. All right, which half of the season is that going to be? Is he going to be guaranteed to be fit when Isaac isn't? Do we risk going again chasing Europe without having a reliably fit? I mean, centre forward. Wilson's a wonderful player when he's fit, but it's when he's fit, and the same applies to an outside line. Bonds is going to fight for it. Nobody will have his position automatically. Just because Gordon made the Euro squad and was our player of the year doesn't mean automatically he plays 38 games in the Premier League this coming season, not with Bonds breathing down his neck. But I tell you what, Bonds breathing down his neck will often make certain we get the best of Gordon. And that's why we're looking for a centre right sided centre half to keep Shaw on his toes.
I can't wait to see Harvey Barnes fully fit and available to push Anthony Gordon all the way. There's a lot of questions from a lot of fans. Is it going to be a waste of money? How does it fit in? Terrible season last season with injuries, not going to make it. I saw enough last season to feel like he's going to be a star for Newcastle United, and he's going to be worth every single penny and more than Newcastle United paid. Some great goals he scored last season, and when he got that run of games where his fitness was all right, he was electric. He's a very, very talented player. He's got a lot to offer. 26 years of age. His best years are ahead of him. He just needs to avoid injury. And let's be fair, the injury he picked up against Sheffield United was a very, very strange one. I think, if I remember correctly, the medical staff hadn't seen it before. It was that strange. And then he had a few
under his toe, wasn't it?
Yeah,
which
by
was
just
quite amazing.
Kicking a ball. But I'm so excited to see him injury-free. And I agree with you. I don't think Gordon is necessarily guaranteed to start on that left. And that's what competition does. And you want a manager who is willing to pick his team on how well someone trains. And it's not picking his favorites. It's not picking the big stars because of who they are. It's saying to everyone in that team, look, he's coming for your place. He's coming for your place. It's about who works hardest on the pitch And that's, you get it on merit, not on what you've achieved previously.
Well,
And I think you're right, John.
yeah,
Gordon,
Gordon, yes, Gordon's going to be pushed all the way, and if he doesn't do it, then boom, and the opportunities come as a total surprise, don't they? The opportunity. You think there's no way in for Bonds to start on the side with Gordon and a new outside right board, and it's so, oh dear me, and then all of a sudden things change. Like Miley was injured, or you look at the Newcastle situation, left-sided centre half. You've got Byrne, very reliable, well loved by the manager. You've got Botman to come back who can play there, but we're still by Kelly. And if you're Lewis Hall and you think, oh, at long last, I'm worth £28 million, somebody at Newcastle said, so I'm a good player. And all of a sudden, I've got myself established. I've had a bad start to my Newcastle career, so I'm now the left back for this coming season. Maybe, but Kelly can play left back as well. So all of a sudden, we're buying people to push the people. We don't want Shaw to be comfortable. We don't want Botman or Byrne to be comfortable. We don't want Lewis Hall to be comfortable. Equally, Barnes will make certain Gordon's not comfortable. Who's going to make certain Isak's not comfortable, by the way? And we must buy an outside right.
well, that's the key question, isn't it? About the forward line is who's going to rival Alexander Isak for that place in the starting 11. And we'll get onto that in just a moment. But with Anthony Gordon, obviously, look, the whole thing with Liverpool came up towards the end of June. He's not going anywhere. He's going to come back. He's going to get his head down and he's going to work really hard. But I would like to see a new contract delivered to him this summer. I think that would pick everyone up as well. And that would send a statement out to the rest of the league. We are wanting to keep our best player. And Isak. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we call them our blue chip players, you've got to reward them. We rewarded Bruno, did we not? And we rewarded Joe Linton, did we not? And now they're super players. But are you telling me they're better than Isaac and Gordon? No, I think they're all four go in the basket that's marked blue chip. And therefore, if you've got a 25-goal centre forward and you've got an outside left that suddenly comes from nowhere to your player of the year and goes in the England squad, you tie them down, surely, don't you? And I'm certain Newcastle are working on that and trying to get the right package. And all of a sudden, we'll just hear that they've signed, and that's fine. But yes, I'd be very comfortable to see, because not only does it mean they're rewarded and we are going to keep them, but even if somebody comes sniffing and pays over 100 million or trying to get them, you're in a very strong position to get the real top dollar, because they're sitting on a 5-year contract or something. They can't sneak. If they enter in the final year of their contract, you're vulnerable. And I'm not saying they're doing that, but don't let the thing run down and reward people that deserve rewarding. And by Jove, I think Gordon and Isak have earned a new contract.
Yeah, I do as well. A couple more comments coming in, John. We've got Paul saying, with Williams going to Barcelona, it's looking like Rafinha is a possibility. Obviously, ex-Leeds United winger, although with no Europe, it's going to really hamper us. And also, you've got to remember that Rafinha is going to be on big, big wages. I mean, he signed for Barcelona for £55 million. So Newcastle might be able to get him for around that, but it's the wages and sign-on fee, and as Paul says there, the lack of European football, which might hamper that signing. Diamond says we need a proven right winger, not a prospect. Almiron would likely have to go to facilitate the right wing signing. Murphy is decent in the squad. He says, I would like Mbeumo, good numbers, proven, would likely cost you around £50 million. We've got Eric saying, I've always rated Welsh international Dan James of Leeds, 13 goals and 7 assists last season and 43 appearances, albeit in the Championship. Maybe more of an affordable option if PSR is still a concern. I don't think that one's going to go down too well with many of our listeners. Pete says, Miggy has to go. Rafinha would be an unbelievable signing, expensive wages and fee, but would give everyone that much needed boost. Rafinha seems to be a really popular choice, John. It would be an ambitious signing. It would be a statement signing, proven in the Premier League, but perhaps an unrealistic one, do you think?
Perhaps, yes, perhaps, because you've got to move them out of that club without Europe and on big dollar to them and big dollar to him. But I do think that Newcastle need a statement of intent. They need a big signing in the way that we spent 65 million to get Isaac. In the way we've gone about signing Tonali for 52 million. We need that sort of impact signing. I know Tonali wasn't able to make an impact, but he was meant to do so. That's why they paid top dollar. And he was top man AC Milan and in the international side, Italy's, etc. So big money statement, Isaac. Big money statement, Tonali. I think we need another one now. And if we do, and we're only going to get one, it would be the outside right. We would curtail the money, I think, on the centre half, because is that the biggest signing you're going to make this summer? The centre half, well, maybe it'll be difficult to move share. So let's have competition, and that's wonderful. But the outside right position is there for the taking. And I think if we're going to make a real statement of intent, like we did when we signed Isaac, and like we did when we signed Tonali, it's got to be the outside right. And that is the one where it ought to be. I mean, if we're talking about names, the Brentford guy who was mentioned there, we've mentioned before, and you've talked about how you rate him, etc. I've talked about Elanga and how I rate him. Um, Another name that comes into my book for outside right, Andrew, is Nico Gonzalez of Fiorentina. Um, Now he is quality. Don Hutchinson, and I know Don quite well. Uh, you know the guy. He's was Gateshead born, but got all his caps for Scotland because his dad was Scottish. But he was born and brought up. He's a proper Geordie, and he was brought up at Gateshead. And Don is a good judge of a footballer. He has watched this guy a lot. He refers to him as being like Bernardo Silva. Now, that isn't bad. that isn't bad if that's true. He's a left footed outside right, which sort of suits the way Eddie plays. He has his wingers playing on the wrong side, if you like, with the foot, so that they then come inside to finish as well, not just go on the outside. Um, he's probably in the price range. If I'm having a punt on an outsider, because the Brentford guy, Elanga, is not taking a chance because we've seen them in the Premier League and that's great. And one of them would do, like Jared Bourne would do. But I think that might be over ambitious. But if we were taking a punt on somebody abroad and going off left midfield, somebody like Nico Gonzalez might well fit the bill.
I'm certain a lot of people would be very happy with Gonzalez becoming a Newcastle United player. And any of the names mentioned there, I think would definitely get some Newcastle United fans very, very excited. It's funny though, isn't it? Because Rafinha joined Barcelona from Leeds United after they'd been, I think they were relegated, weren't they?
Yeah.
And now he's been linked to Newcastle. Everyone's saying, yeah, that's a good signing. But I wonder if the reaction would have been the same had it been Newcastle buying him from Leeds, because we've seen when we are suggesting players like Mbeumo and Elanga that it doesn't excite everybody. And I think that's largely because of the team they're playing for. And you move to Barcelona and suddenly you're maybe twice or three times better in the mind of Sermon and Gonzalez, as you mentioned there, John, would certainly get lots of fans excited. Looking at that striker option, as we've said, Alexander Isak, it would be great to see him sign a new contract. A statement of intent, but also protects the value, as you mentioned. We've got to focus though on Callum Wilson, and I'm not going to speak for too long about Callum, because I've said it enough over the last few weeks. I said it on last week's Monday show, and then the news dropped on Friday that he's injured again, and I hate to be proved right, but I've been banging the drum for the best part of the last year. Newcastle United cannot gamble on Callum Wilson anymore. It's just not worth the gamble, and they need, if a decent bid comes in, to just accept that it's time to cash in, because I think they're going to struggle to get the best part of 25 games out of him, and Newcastle United, they can't afford to risk Alexander Isak having to play the majority of the season, or having to play it without a backup if he's, not feeling himself, if he's
And,
injured. Just things aren't working.
And even putting a sub on for him after an hour or 70 minutes. You've got to have somebody there. Yeah, as I've said many times on this podcast, you're strong as your weakest link. And our weakest link is centre forward. Hardly with Isak, but the backup for Isak. And yes, like you, I've banged on about Wilson for so long. I mean, he's such a good player when fit. But I mean, this when fit thing is such a massive question. We have got to ask ourselves, and Eddie, who's very loyal and loves players that he's worked with, and he worked with Callum Wilson at Bournemouth as well as Newcastle. He loves the guy. He loves his positivity. He loves his outlook, his attitude, and everything about him. But you can't love his physical being, because it doesn't matter how much Callum's saying, I'm positive. I know I'll be all right and I'll do this. I mean, he was batting at the end of the season to try to get in the Euros, for goodness sake, ahead of Ollie Watkins or Tony. I mean, no hope and Bob hope. I mean, I said at the time, there's absolutely no chance of that happening. And then, for goodness sake, bless him, and I'm uncomfortable because I think he's such a good player. But we've got to be realistic in this world. I'm picking up the situation and finding that he's come home from training in Germany and is doubtful for the beginning of the season, and he hasn't played a flipping game. He wasn't even injured pre-season in a match, for goodness sake. He's training, and all of a sudden he's feeling he's back and having to come home. I mean, he pulls up and withdraws more often than Joe Biden. It is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it cannot go on. Now, regardless of how much, and I'm supporting Eddie to get the backing he wants and everything out of the situation at Newcastle. But if he wants to keep Callum Wilson as our only backup centre forward, I've got to be suspicious of that, because Eddie, you are taking a massive risk, and I mean a massive one, not just a little one. You're taking a massive risk, and we can't afford a risk like that. You've got to look at the situation. He is entering the last year of his contract. Now, if you cash in this summer, however much you cash in for, whether it's only 20 million, but he goes to a Saudi club and you get 20 million, you get 20 million. If you say, I want him to be the backup centre forward for me this coming season, that means automatically he's a free transfer. Because at the end of this season, when he's played back up again and hasn't been available for half the season or 3/4 of the season, is then his contract's run out and he's a free transfer. So you get nothing from him. Or you give him another contract, heaven forbid, at the end of this coming season. And he's 33-year-old and he's so injury prone, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I have seen my usual thing. I say, Lord looking, Howard Hughes, Shergar, and Dodo and Jasmine Dean more often all put together than I've seen Callum Wilson. And I'm likely to see this season. I mean, he comes back from Germany injured and he hasn't played a single game, but he might be doubtful for the beginning of this season. I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it? And I don't know that you can go on like this. Yes, I accept the situation that you almost have got to get a centre forward in before you let him go to Saudi or wherever it may be. And I think the lad would go because he knows it would be his last hurrah in a decent payday. And I know that even getting a centre forward as backup is not cheap. So you've got a problem there, but you might just have to bite the bullet. I mean, otherwise you go with these false number nines and hope Gordon can play there or Harvey Barnes can play there, and Harvey Barnes could play there as a false nine, but Anderson could have played there. He's gone, he can't, so it would have to be Gordon or Barnes. But really, a big, big decision has got to be made by Eddie Howe in conjunction with Paul Mitchell and backed up by Eels and the board. What do we do about Callum Wilson? And surely, if you had any flickering doubt or hope that he would be a backup, surely sending him home from Germany made you face. You know, when with Joe Biden, we got to the stage where they actually had to face reality and bite the bullet and say enough's enough, we can't go. Surely surely Callum leaving Germany made you think this is one step too far. This is happening too often. We haven't even had a game and it's happened. So perhaps the time to take a chance is over and it's gone and we should do something about it. We've got to bite the bullet.
Yeah, maybe sending them home from the training camp was the kind of the version of Joe Biden at NATO calling the Ukrainian president the wrong name, and it was quite the mispronunciation as well. It's interesting though with Callum Wilson, isn't it? Because there's so much debate about what happens. You know, I said over the weekend, you've got to cash in. Everyone said, well, it's all good saying that, but who in their right mind is going to come and take a chance on him? Now, he's linked to West Ham a few weeks ago, but you know, if you're a Premier League side, I can't see you taking a chance on him, especially if you're a lower Premier League side. You know, I mean, Ipswich have gone out and signed Liam Delap for 20 million, but it was kind of them sort of teams where you could maybe see them saying,
Of course,
okay, do we
of
pin our
course.
hopes on Callum Wilson? But then you look at the realism of him actually playing more than 25 games a season, and you go, no, because goals get us safety, but we can't rely on them enough to get them goals. Saudi, okay, interest there, but you know, I think whatever happens, Newcastle are going to have to take less money than they would do if it was a fit Callum Wilson being sold. And I think I'm at the stage now where if someone put 10 to 12 million on the table, I think if I was Newcastle, I would be seriously considering cashing in because I just don't think you can take the risk anymore. Now, there's a couple of scenarios being presented. Do you keep Callum Wilson, John? Let him go on a free next summer, and do you bring in either someone who's primarily a right winger, so let's say Mbeumo, for example, but can play up top? So should Isak need a rest and Wilson's not available, you can play Mbeumo up there on the top and maybe switch Gordon out on the right, Barnes on the left. So that's one scenario. Or do you start making calls now and letting teams know that Wilson is available on the cheap, put 10 million on the table, you'll cash in, and then you go and spend 50, 60 million on a striker to rival Alexander Isak right now, right in this present time?
I don't think they'll buy a 50 or 60 million pound centre forward. In an ideal world, I would love them to do that, and that's how much a ready-made centre forward costs minimum. And that's not your top bracket. That's 100 million for your top bracket centre forwards, which is what Isak would cost today, or to cost. I mean, to be truthful, you've got to put the word out now. I mean, we're going to have the problem in a year's time, and the year's going to disappear like so quick. It's untrue. We have kept putting off facing the Callum Wilson situation, and you were saying certainly a fit Callum Wilson would make a lot more than 10 or 12 million. A fit Callum Wilson, we wouldn't dream of selling. He's a top quality player. You fit Callum Wilson, but I tell you what, now you can. I'm not a betting man because it's too hard to earn the money to just go and give it to Ladbrokes. I'm not a betting man, but if I was a betting man, I would know that Callum Wilson's not going to be available. He's not going to do the job, and is never going to be regularly available for us again. Now, the biggest hope, you're correct. The clubs aren't going to take a risk down the bottom. They'll be tempted when they see the wonderful Callum Wilson, then they remember his record and say, no, perhaps not. I think the biggest hope of getting any sort of money, because they've got so much money, it's untrue, and is the Saudis, because they buy names, don't they? What they do is buy a name to put before the public. They bought for money from Liverpool. Effectively, has done nothing really since he's been out there. They just bought his reputation, didn't they? They may buy the reputation of Callum Wilson, and I think the best hope is that somebody like them or Qatar or somebody of that nature will buy reputations, which is what they tend to do. In this country, where it's going to be more realistic, We want a centre forward who's going to be available all the time. But then again, doesn't that tell you, if you're Eddie Howe or you're a Newcastle board or you're Paul Mitchell, and you're saying quite rightly that clubs like West Ham or clubs further down the Premier League won't take a risk on Wilson because he'll not be fit enough and he's going to have to be the main goal scorer. Why should we take a risk on him this season? Because we are taking the same risk, believe you me, because we can't guarantee that Isaac will play 38 games plus the domestic cups. We can't expect that.
No, we can't. But as many people pointed out to me on Saturday, it's not as easy as finding that bid and that money off a buyer, because they look at why Newcastle United are selling, and do they want to end up with a striker in the same position?
Well,
I'm going to
surely,
present you with two scenarios, John. One scenario, that the transfer window ends with Alexander Isak, Callum Wilson, and a young striker, or the season ends with the transfer window ends with Alexander Isak, a young striker, and then you have to alternate whoever the comes in on the right wing, Anthony Gordon. Which one of those would you want? Or in an ideal world, I imagine it would be Alexander Isak, and then maybe two new strikers. But I think that one's slightly unrealistic.
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, first and foremost, before you start looking at your centre forwards, you've got to expect that you've got an outside right in the can straight away. I mean, before we start thinking, do we risk Wilson? I mean, in an ideal world, I would have an outside right nailed on as the blue chip signing. Then I would get 10, 12 million out of the Saudis for Wilson. And by the way, Newcastle of all clubs should be able to find out from the Saudis whether they're willing to pay 12 million for Wilson or not, considering who our owners are. I mean, dear me, if we can't get a direct answer from the Pro League's top clubs on whether they would be interested in Wilson or not, then we've got no inroads anyway. And I don't believe that for 1 second. So we should know very well whether we can get money for Wilson or not. But again, we're getting to the stage of life, my friend, where we were talking about only having Kelly through the door. I mean, time's going to run out before we get the outside right, before we get the centre half, before we sell Wilson and buy another centre forward. Because we can't sell Wilson and not buy a centre forward, mind. That's even worse off. That's even worse off. If you're going to finish up in that situation, you better keep him for a year, knowing he's going to go at the end on a free, and spending the year trying to get the centre forward replacement you want. And if necessary, sign that guy in January if you're able to do so. But we have got to front the Callum Wilson situation. We cannot let it drift. I'm not meaning that Newcastle will not do that. They don't have to make a public announcement of what the conclusion is. But when they're sitting down, I can't believe Paul Mitchell isn't sitting down with Eddie and saying, Eddie, I know how much you like Callum Wilson, etc., etc. Look at the facts. He's just come back with a back injury. He's played those games in the last 3 seasons. He thought he could make the Euros, got nowhere near it. He's habitually injured. He's a wonderful player when not injured. Are you going to risk your reputation and our chance of getting into Europe on him being fit? And maybe his bunch will come in and say, by the way, I've got a magic wand in the back of my bag and I'm going to wave it over Callum. And all of a sudden he's going to be desperate Dan, fit as a lock for the whole season. Well, wouldn't that be wonderful? But I think Callum, once you get injury problems like his, they're too strong. But we really have to confront this situation. It's been drifting, hasn't it? The centre forward position's been drifting. And every time we've sort of touched on it, there's always been something more important for Newcastle to address. Now, would say that it's more important to address an outside right. Is it more important to address a centre half? The centre forward situation always gets sent, 3 steps down the ladder. But we cannot keep doing this, because we will sit sometime this coming season and Isaac will get an injury. And we will be sitting saying, we've got no centre forward and we're looking to get the top 4. Well, we won't get to the top four if we don't. This situation must be addressed now, even if the answer is we'll gamble for 1 year, we'll keep him, we'll give him a free at the end of this year, and in this year, we're going to spend the whole time negotiating for a centre forward, because you don't have to just negotiate in January. You negotiate any time of the year. You just can't sign them until January. But we've got it. I mean, now is the time now to sell Wilson and get a centre forward in. Month and a half or something to go.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And it's just about suitors. And I think in an ideal world, you'd cash in, you'd get a bit of money from, you'd go out and you'd get a striker who's a little bit more than someone with potential. You know, they've scored goals. I would be a little uneasy if Callum Wilson remained and then it was a young striker, but at least then you would have a third option. I think in an ideal world, you would want, you know, two outstanding strikers, but that's just not going to happen this summer because there's other positions that need strengthening as well. Like we mentioned, outside right, and then a centre back. You know, they're still going to have to be quite clever with the budget. But you look around at young strikers who can you know, arrive in Newcastle United, and there's not many at all. And I know I mentioned Liam Delap a few weeks ago. I mean, he cost Ipswich £20 million, and I don't think he's kicked the ball in the Premier League. So that shows you the market they're in. And there's not really many other names about where you look at and think, okay, they could do a job. And I also think, you know, whoever the striker is going to be, it's probably going to come right out of the blue, and it'll probably not be a name that's been mentioned. And in a way, that's quite good. So it means it's not Dominic Calvert-Lewin, because I definitely don't want that happening.
No.
It's difficult because I did
How,
go.
how worried would you be, Andrew, if, let me put a scenario to you, we start the season, we've signed an outside right, we've possibly signed a centre half, but we are starting the season with Isak in the first team and only Callum Wilson as backup. We haven't got a young striker. So the way it is right now today, as far as the centre forward's concerned, how worried would you be about making the top four with that setup?
I'd be terrified. I don't think they'd make the top four at all, because you cannot go into that season just with Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak. It'd be a little less daunting if the signing on the right can
Could
do a
play
good
centre
job
forward as well.
up top. And they've got Anthony Gordon, but I don't think he can play that role as well up top. I think he's half the player than he is when he's out on the wing. And you know, so you're gambling. You know, can that player they've brought to the right do a good job up top? It's not always that easy. And Burmo has proved he can do it, because he filled in Five and Tony in many games when he was
who
suspended.
else plays outside right that can play centre forward well?
And the point is, though, John, you've brought that outside right in because you needed that outside right, so you don't want to have to turn to him and say you're
To
going up
play
top.
centre forward, because
Exactly.
then you've got Murphy. And could you see Harvey Barnes playing as a false nine?
The one, did he do it once, twice last season? He just looked totally out of depth. It just didn't look comfortable. Jacob Murphy was the same. He didn't look comfortable when he had to play there. And you know, if you're Newcastle United, I think you look back on those games and you think we don't want to be in this scenario again. And look, I don't think it's a case of them not trying. I think they will try their hardest. But it's, as we've proven, you know, it's hard to come up with a name. Now they're going to have scouts and reports and stuff, and then we'll have hopefully a list. But I think it'll still be quite difficult to find that right player to
You
fit
know,
in to that scenario. Now, as I was about to say that I've got a list of strikers here, but they're all strikers who have scored 20, 30 goals last season. They're not going to be cheap. You know, Lewis Apenza from Leipzig, you've got the Paul Mitchell link there potentially. 24 years of age, Belgian international, 24 goals and 34 appearances. But how much is he going to cost you? You only moved to Leipzig last summer for £46 million. You're probably looking double that. Again, goes back to the budget question, goes back to, are you able to persuade someone who's first choice in a team like Leipzig to come to Newcastle and say, although it's not nailed on, Alexander Isak is our first choice. You go and battle him. That's where you're starting from.
you've got no Europe, and you're telling him that he's not going to start in the team. He won't come, will he? I
No,
mean, you're
exactly. And
absolutely
that's
right. Your argument's absolutely right, Andrew. And they won't come. And also, we know we're not going to spend another 60 million like we did on Isaac this summer. Goodness
that's
knows
it.
what happened. We're not going to do that for a centre forward to play essentially backup to Isaac, because the way Eddie plays, he won't play twin strikers. He'll play one striker in a wide man on each side of him. So the guy that comes isn't going to go automatically in the team. But I'll tell you a funny scenario. You were sort of saying at the top of the podcast what would make us happy, and the outcome is a big name outside right that is a blue-eyed boy, blue chip player, the big signing, and the centre half. We could get that outside right and that centre half, Andrew, and the Achilles heel to us making the Champions League would be not having a centre forward backup for Isaac.
Totally agree
That,
with you. I'm
that
going to
could
just
be the Achilles heel. We could get what we want, Andrew, from outside right and centre half. Supposing we get the ones we want, we will be so thrilled it's untrue. And then when the dust settles, we might say, oh dear, the Achilles heel is centre forward.
I'm going to put a couple of names to you. So you've got Dominic Solanke in it. The Bournemouth owner over the last couple of days has confirmed there's a £65 million release clause or thereabouts. Again, it's a lot of money. Eddie Howe has gone on the record, though, to see how much he admires Dominic Solanke. Of course, signed him as Bournemouth manager. First season, though, he's really found his goal scoring touch last season. I mean, have you seen enough to suggest that it's now going to be prolific from here on in? And would you spend 65 million on Dominic Solanke?
That's two good questions, because what he looked initially when he looked a decent young prospect at Liverpool, didn't he? And he went to Bournemouth, and he's one of these players that's built beautifully. He looks like an athlete. He glides like an athlete. He doesn't score enough goals. And then all of a sudden, in this last season, he has. And the question is, does he do it again next season? And I know he wasn't in the best team in the world at Bournemouth, and they were more progressive last season. But you know what? If your question was to me was, will he do it again? And would I spend 65? You know what? My third answer is, I'm only concerned about Newcastle United, and they will not spend 65 anyway. And so he won't come. I think that deal is Fantasy Island right now. I think it's fantasy.
The other name is Ivan Toney. It seems like Brentford are cutting the asking price for him. It was thought to be around £85 million, and reports suggested it's getting cut by quite a bit because there's no takers. Look, great goal scorer, potentially got unfinished business here at Newcastle because of the way it ended. But I have to say, coming out just days after his ban was lifted, of course, he was suspended for betting offences and missed quite a bit of football. And he came out just days before he was set to play his first game in, I don't know what it was, 8, 9, 10 months, and stated his desire to leave Brentford and go to a bigger club. And I just thought, look, you can have those thoughts, and no one's going to begrudge you those thoughts, but have a bit of decorum, have a bit of respect. Don't be putting that out there on Sky Sports News in an interview after everything
Absolutely.
they've done.
Can you imagine how well it would go down if tomorrow morning Tonali put out that he would like to leave Newcastle United? Just
Exactly.
when
And I
he's
just
about to
think
come back.
that from Tony put me off. I think he's a really good player. Maybe I'm too sensitive, and maybe people in the comments in the video will say, look, if you can get him for £45 million, you forget about that attitude, you forget about that interview, and you sign him. But I don't know. I think that says a lot about a player. It certainly, to me, suggests a big bit of disrespect towards Brentford by doing that.
Oh, hugely. You're absolutely right there. Again, if we're living in a realistic world and not on Fantasy Island, I guess we have to. He's not going to come to Newcastle and play second fiddle to Isaac. I mean, he's trying to get in the England team, and he's looking at the England situation and saying, is Harry Kane perhaps on the wane? But if he is, can I see off Ollie Watkins, who's a totally different sort of centre forward, more mobile, more stretching them at the back, where he's a more traditional centre forward. But if he's going to push Ollie Watkins and push Kane for England, he ain't going to do it from being cover for Isaac. So for a million reasons, it's a non-starter anyway.
You might have to take that guy. I mean, look, if you look around, Man United, Arsenal have been tentatively linked, but is he going to start there, especially at Man United. They've got two young strikers up top and Marcus Rashford as well. So, it might be something that he has to maybe reconsider what he wants from his next move. But certainly from my
He
point
might
of
have
view,
to stay where he is if he wants to get in the
yeah,
England side.
it's the attitude for me which raises questions. And the final name I'm gonna mention to you, John, just because I want the people to have a good laugh before we sign off. Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
Oh yes, well there's a good laugh. You've done well there. You know your timing. I mean that's the wonderful thing. Please no, please God no, because we're looking at somebody that's 5 years younger than Wilson. Isn't that wonderful? But he's a replica. So we'll just have 5 more years of dodginess. I mean, he is a replica of Wilson. He is a good centre forward who's a quality player and forced his way in the England side. Does that sound like Callum Wilson of 4 years ago? A good quality player forced his way into the England side, and then all of a sudden you're injury prone. Now, yes, last season he did well. He was involved in about, off the top of my head, in about 32 of the 38 games. Not all as starters, maybe it's 26 or something like that as starters. The rest is a sub. But the 2 years before that, he was only involved in 17 of the 38 games, and they weren't all starters. There were sub appearances in there. So, yes, he did well last season. He didn't score a bundle of goals, but you could say he was playing in a very bad Everton side, and it was very difficult to score goals in the Everton side. But no, please, if we are going to replace Callum Wilson, it is only because of Callum Wilson's injury record. That's the only reason we're wanting to replace him. So let's not take a risk on somebody else with a poor injury record, for goodness sake. That is jumping from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, let's not take that chance. We don't want a three-legged horse. The one thing we need is somebody that's going to give us a reliability to be available. And that guarantee is not attached to the Everton boy at all.
But I wonder if his reputation is what's doing him damage, because at the end of June, when it was linked that Newcastle were going to go after him, then they couldn't get the right price from him, etc., etc. I was like you, John, not a chance. Why would we want him? But other than the two seasons which you've mentioned, 2021, 22, 22, 23, played 17 games in each of those seasons. Every season before that, he's played more than 30 games for Everton, barring the one where he broke into the side back in 2016-17. And he's scored quite a few goals. Last season, he got 8. He's hit, 21, 15. So maybe we're doing him a disservice. And maybe, he had 2 bad years. I mean, Solanke's had injuries as well, and he's overcome them. Potentially, if Newcastle can get a deal there of £30 million, maybe it's not the worst deal in the world if he's overcome his injuries.
Well, that's a huge if, by the way.
It
And
is.
of course, you're right. But I mean, Wilson had a great record before he got his injuries. I mean,
True.
once you get severe injuries, and he had them for 2 successive seasons, then how reliable are you going to be? And now, I do think that the point you've just made is the point Eddie Howe was considering. He was considering a situation where we had to buy somebody in to be cover for Isak. Now, and yet we've got to buy him in at about 30 million because we're wanting money to spend elsewhere in the team. So where are you going to get a centre forward that's experienced, can lead a line and score goals for 30 million? Well, first of all, it's got to be somebody with baggage. Otherwise, he would be 60 million. So that's the baggage, is his injury record. But it could be that if we could get him for 30 million, and this may still apply, mind, and this may still come around, if we can get somebody for 30 million that's as good as Callum Wilson, in England centre forward with a reasonable goals record, bad injuries, but we think he might have overcome those injuries, or at least not be as susceptible to long periods out as Wilson is. I mean, Wilson, bless him, looks on his last legs, doesn't he? I mean, in the lad at Everton, not quite. Then that was the gamble that was worth taking. He's only 27 as well. But, you're gambling on him not having that injury situation. But in an ideal world, at first glance, you're thinking, I'm replacing one crook with another crook. Is that surely there must be somebody out there that is at least fit?
Well, final question, John, and I suspect the answer might be I haven't got one. And if it is, it just again reaffirms how difficult it is for Newcastle United to find a striker to fit in with the scenario they've got. But have you got a name that springs to mind?
To be honest, it's the one position where I probably haven't, because there's a huge difficulty, isn't it? How do you buy a centre forward when you're not going to spend 60 million or above? Um, because if you're going to spend that money, you can only do it in one position, and it's going to be for your outside right, because he's going to be the starter, and your centre forward isn't going to be the starter. If you're not going to spend 60 million, you're not going to get any of the. You had a list there, Andrew. I bet everybody on that list, a quality centre forward that scored a pile of goals last season. Are they going to first? Are they going to come with no European soccer? Second, are they going to come to sit on the bench? And third, how much are they going to cost? So the ideal. Remember a couple of years ago when we tried to sign the boy from Saint Etienne, and he went to Paris Saint-Germain. And he was 21 or whatever. That's the sort of signing that Newcastle United were looking for in an ideal world. The other ideal worlds, you go to the other end of the spectrum and you sign somebody like the Everton boy because you can get him for 30 million, but there's got to be something wrong. There's something wrong with injuries. You may well come here to sort of and be happy to come here because he's at a club that's going places and Everton aren't, and he'll get in this side, he'll get his opportunities like Harvey Bonds, and it's a risk worth taking. But Newcastle are unique in they're looking for a centre forward. When they look for Isak, they were just looking for a good young centre forward. In the £60 million, and by Jove, did they get a bargain? This is a different ballgame. This has got to be a £30 million, not has been, but somebody with baggage, or it's got to be a kid. Because if it's your quality centre forward, and you're mentioning Tony, and you're going to have to pay a few quid. Even Tony's reduced price, you're not going to get him for 30 million. And he's not going to want to sit on the subs bench. You're not going to get any of that list you had, any of the ones I like. This is the real test of what they can do. And that's why I've got a feeling at the end of the day, we'll buy an outside right, we'll buy a centre half, we'll bite the bullet and go with Wilson for the coming season and give him a free to end the season. I think that's what will happen. And if it does happen, I'll be grateful for the outside right in the centre half. I'll be apprehensive about the centre forward situation and say we're flying by the seat of our pants in an effort to get back into Europe. But realistically, that's what I think will happen.
Well, we will wait and see. Thank you, as always, to John for popping on to the podcast. To you guys watching and listening, thank you, as always, for your support. Do get in touch via email at theeibwpodcast@reachplc.com. Give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave us a rating and review on the podcast channel. It's much appreciated, as always. And for myself and John, we'll see you guys next week.
Take care.